Welcome to Capital Insight. I'm State Representative Kevin Mannix from Salem, and I'm your host for this program, which is designed to give all of us a little more insight in the goings-on around the state capitol and the people and personalities who are involved in state government in the state of Oregon. Our guest today is someone who is very well known to most of you, I am sure, State Representative Peter Courtney, who is the Democratic leader for the House of Representatives. He's in his third term in a row, having previously served 2 terms in the early 80s, and is someone that is well known as an advocate for children, an advocate against sex offenders, an advocate for criminal justice reform, an advocate for education reform. What more could I say? He's also known as someone who is not restrained in his comments, but we're going to do things a little bit differently today. I'm going to force Peter to talk a little bit about himself and his family and his background, and then we'll shift to some issues. Anyway, welcome to Capital Insight.
Thank you, thank you.
You're a West Virginia guy. You came out here in the 70s, early 70s from West Virginia?
Actually, I didn't, Kevin. We should have talked about this ahead of time because
that's okay. You educate me.
Well, I feel bad about that because I want to make you look good in the show. Not that you need me to make you look good, but I came out here from Rhode Island, but the formative years of my life in grade school, middle school, and high school were all in West Virginia, and then even a year of college was in Athens, West Virginia. So that's correct. West Virginia has had probably the most significant impact on me.
And you came out here and you clerked for the Court of Appeals.
Yeah, the first year the Court of Appeals was in existence in 1969. I was out here clerking for the late Judge William Fort.
And then you went on. Well, tell us a little bit about what you did after that. Practice of law.
Actually, it's been so long ago I forgot, Kevin. Let me see. I worked for the Personnel Division of the State of Oregon. I worked for Oregon Tax Research. That might surprise a lot of people since it's an ultra-conservative group that hound dogs the Oregon legislature for a year with Chris Dudley, who now works at the Oregon School Board Association. I worked as a legal aid attorney, I worked in private practice, and I worked as a hearings officer for the Employment Relations Board, and that about does it. Now, of course, I work for Western Oregon State College, the assistant to the president.
Now, as part of this, you've obviously had public service tied in with your career, I think, ever since you left law school. But it seems to me that early on there was a local emphasis. You served on city council. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got into that?
Well, I just did it, yes. I had started even in grade school thinking about stuff like this, and I was out here and I volunteered to be on a citizen advisory committee. I think it was on the Human Rights Commission, City of Salem, which is, as you know, recently gotten a lot of press. And I'd been on it for about a year, and my city council seat was up, or actually it wasn't up. It was up, but it wasn't. Somebody got appointed to fill a vacancy. And I decided just to run one day, and I went down and filed the papers, and that's about how it started.
How long did you serve on the city council?
6 years, 6 years, and 2 of those years I also served in the charter Salem Area Mass Transit District. At that time, city council persons also served on that, and I served on that then.
Now, you headed towards the legislature and you served 2 terms in the early 80s. Can you tell us a little bit about why you got into that and what you did while you were there?
Yeah, I wanted to be in the Oregon legislature from the day I got out here because shortly after I got out here, I walked through the halls of the state capitol. It was July of 1969. I walked up on the gallery areas and looked down on the House and Senate floor, and I thought that, I remember the rugs, really, I know it sounds terrible, that the whole building, I never saw a state capitol like Oregon. I thought it was nice. And I decided I had put in 6 hard years in the city council. It wasn't just jumping, you know, I'd put in my time, I thought. And so I thought I'd take a shot at it. Those were terrible times to serve, Kevin, not as bad as now, but terrible. We had tremendous deficits back then. There wasn't any money, a lot like now. And that was the 81 session was the longest session up until this session. The 82 special session was the longest special session ever. I don't know if we're going to top that one day. And the 83 session was another very hard session. They were very hard sessions, and we didn't do a lot. We didn't build prisons, didn't do much in criminal justice. All we did was raise taxes and cut budgets.
Not a very pleasant thing to have to contemplate.
No.
Well, then, after 2 terms, you made a shot at Congress, which didn't succeed. What were you doing privately during the time after you were out of the legislature?
Well, you mean after I got beat for Congress?
Well, first I should mention, in case folks misunderstand, that legislators also have other jobs. We're citizen legislators. We're only part-time legislators, and we're expected to make a living doing other things. But through that transition, there must have been some things you did when you ran for Congress after you lost in that first race. What were you doing in terms of your private life, making a living?
Kevin, when I lost that congressional race, I was $20,000 in debt. I had a second mortgage in my house. We had a new baby, our first child, and I had no job. I was out in the streets. And Dick Myers, president of Western Oregon State College, called me up a week after I got beat, and I was in a bad way. And I was a still state rep, but I didn't have a job. And because I'd gambled everything on running for Congress. And after talking about it for 3 months, I went to work for Western Oregon State College. So that was the summer of 1984, and started to pay off the debt that I had incurred in the congressional race.
So you've been there 9 years now.
Yes, I have been at Western since August 14th, 1984.
All right, but then you also came back to the legislature. You and I ran for election, and you ran to, in effect, get returned to the legislature in 1988.
Right.
And you were elected for your district. You're now in your third term in succession since you came back.
I want to tell the listening audience, you did a lot better in that election than I did. You took out an incumbent, and I just barely got back by 98 votes on a recount 3 weeks after the election. So you did a lot better than I did, and I learned a lot of lessons about politics in that election, which I never would have learned otherwise, but that's interesting. Yeah.
Well, we're now both representing the folks in the Salem area with Gene Derfler, who handles the southern part of the city.
Right.
And now I'm shifting more towards the contemporary Peter Courtney. You have a wife and 3 kids. How do you handle the pressures of public life along with being able to maintain some sort of a private life while also doing your job at Western Oregon State College?
The number one way I do it, among others, Kevin, is if I didn't live where I lived, I wouldn't be doing it. I mean, if I didn't live a mile from the state capitol, I don't think I could be in the position I am. I wouldn't do it. I mean, if I had to commute to be in the legislative session or had to move my whole family here, I wouldn't be in the legislature. And we might pick up on this later. This congressional seat that now has come open is an example of that. I also just don't do a lot of things. I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't socialize much. I don't work as hard at the schmoozing as you can and sometimes should if you want to move up in political power. So I give it up. And I don't sleep a lot, though. I'm sure you're the same guy. If I really told you how many hours a night I sleep, you'd be surprised.
How many hours a night do you sleep?
Well, I get about 4 hours sleep a night, and some of it's because I'm just restless. I wake up a lot, but I don't sleep a lot. And I just turn down a lot. I mean, I just flat out turn down a lot of things so that I can coach kids, and I can go to their events, and I can also be at the Capitol and things. And so I just turn down a lot of things. And we don't take vacations much. I mean, I'm not complaining, folks. I'm not complaining. Goes the territory. I signed up for the tour of duty. But we really don't vacation much, and our vacations are always in the state of Oregon, usually. And I just don't do what you ordinarily might think I do, and that's how it happens.
Well, as far as balancing this, though, I see you, I mean, you've got kids in school. I see you because we happen to have kids in the same school.
Right.
I see you at events.
Right.
And obviously, I guess if I see you there, I must be there, too.
Right, I was going to say, you're there, too. I'll ask, why don't we talk about you, Kevin, in terms of how you handle it?
But part of that, it seems to me that one thing that folks need to understand is there are some politicians who put on the front of being family-oriented and then spend all their time trying to climb to the top, and they leave a broken family or a broken marriage in the process. And I'm not saying that that's always the case. Sometimes that happens. It's a constant challenge, isn't it, to maintain that focus on your family and your kids?
Kevin, I think politics ruins relationships. You don't make friends, it can ruin your life if you're not careful. You have to really be careful. And you have to constantly remind yourself of the things that you just said, or something's going to happen. May happen anyway. But I think it is hard to have a family, especially at my age. My wife and I had our children late in life. We didn't think we could have them. I'm not going to get into that, but they just came late in life. And I think that you really have to be careful almost every day about your job and your family and politics, or you'll make a mistake along the lines that you're suggesting. And you really have to focus on it, because I do think politics, I love it. I love making public policy decisions, being a part of it, but it's a very risky, scary business.
Do you ever look to your family as sort of a baseline of support? I always think of the family as the one group that will give you unqualified love. That is, they're not going to make judgments, value judgments about what you're doing politically or professionally in your job or as a legislator. That's the one place you can go to where nobody's playing a number on you potentially, where they're accepting of you as a person and you're sharing with the family on that basis. Have you ever thought about it in that context?
No, I haven't. Kevin, I never said this before. I'll say it now, first time publicly. I worry so much about my family. I live in fear so much all the time that I don't have an opportunity to sit and think about. I mean, I do a lot of things with my family, and maybe subconsciously that's there, but I'm always so worried about my family and life that I don't think about that. I don't think about them being my support or backup. Maybe it's sort of part of my subconscious, but no, I don't.
We're probably different that way.
Well, I wasn't trying to shoot your theory down. I'm just trying to answer your question, so don't get. I mean, I think it's great. I just, you know.
Well, think on that sometime, because it seems to me that when I do see you with your family, that's the one place where you don't have to be focused on the political side or the work side.
Oh, you're right there. I'm not thinking politics when I'm with them. In fact, Kevin, when I go watch my sons play in sports, you don't want to come up to me and talk politics to me. And I coach myself, and the parents, the kids that I coach will tell you, you don't talk to Peter about politics when I'm coaching, because that's the kids' time. And I'm really pretty much that way. I don't really like people to mess with me on political things when I'm, or even Western things when I'm there with my kids. I'll be very frank with you. I'm doing a sports event or something. I may say something, but I really don't want that. I don't want to be distracted. And you can almost read me that way. I'm there to see them play and to root for them and hope that they and their teammates do well. And I'd rather fool around with that. And so, in that sense, yes, you're right. I mean, I do.
Now, when you go back to Western Oregon State College each day and you're doing your work there, do you try also then to pull yourself away from the political milieu, the pressures that are out there?
Once again, the day after a session, I go back to Western, I'm a different person. And and if you could see me in some meetings where people try to draw me out politically, I get very quiet. I won't talk. And it's because I really do think you got to wear two different hats and you got to separate the two worlds. I'm not saying I don't ever mix them, but I don't like to mix them, Kevin. And so I'm very conscious of that, at least for the first few weeks after a session when I get back over there, when people want to draw me out. And, I just came from Western to do this program, and tonight I'll go back to Western. But if you could see me just before I came here, or tonight when I'm back at a banquet for scholarship students, you'd say, he's different. Well, I would say, well, maybe you know me well enough. You know me in a lot of ways. Maybe you wouldn't find me to be different. But a lot of people would think that I'm different, because it is a different world.
I'm going to pause for a moment and mention to our audience that you're with us on Capital Insight. I'm State Representative Kevin Mannix from Salem. I'm your host. And our guest today is Representative Peter Courtney from the North Salem and Kaiser area. If you ever have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to write to me at Capital Insight, H395, State Capitol, Salem, Oregon, 97310. And I'm always happy to hear from you. And returning to our guest, Peter, we were talking a little bit about the interaction of work and politics and family and all of that. Now, you are the Democratic leader in the House. We are unfortunately, and I'm being political when I say this, in the minority right now. There's 28 Democrats, 32 Republicans. There's a lot of partisanship involved in the state legislature compared to, say, local politics, where partisanship seems to be more downplayed. But how did you come about getting into that leadership role among the Democrats? Can you give the audience a little bit of the history of the transition and how you arrived in that position?
Well, I think if things had worked out for Representative David Dix, I would never have been in this position. I'll be very frank with you. As you recall, the '89 session was difficult and we were in control, and then we started to have some problems in terms of the caucus office. Just to be very frank with you, and our caucus leader, while maybe one of the best political people I'll ever serve with, resigned, and then there was another person came in, and then we had the elections, and then it was sort of open, and I stepped forward and ran for it, and it just happened to get enough votes for it. I'll be frank with you, Kevin. I never aspired to be that kind of leader, and I often think about it, but that's exactly how it happened. It was one of those circumstantial things that somehow or other, okay, I stepped forward and was fortunate enough that enough of the members of the caucus said, we'll try this guy. I don't think most of the caucus who came in with me in '89 ever saw me in that kind of role. I sure didn't, and nor in '81 or '83. I wasn't a caucus leader. I was a different kind of legislator. And so it was just one of those things that really I didn't give a lot of thought to. But at the time, I thought, so a few members of the caucus said, why don't you try it? I remember after we lost the November elections of 1990, we were up at Wilsonville, I think I forget the name of the place, Howard Johnson, one of the places, and it was very gloom among us, and a couple of people said, why don't you look at it? And I did, and then I just put my hat in the ring, and it just happened to work, and it's that uncomplicated and that simple.
What is, for the benefit of a lot of folks, what is the job of the Democratic leader in the House?
It's a partisan position. You are supposed to hold the majority to their feet to the fire. You're the one who, you know, if they make a mistake on procedure, you're supposed to get up and get them after them. If from a public policy standpoint they make a mistake, you're supposed to go after them. If they're not treating the Democratic members in the House fair, you're supposed to go after them. During the off season, we're not in session, you're supposed to recruit candidates. You're supposed to raise money, and you're supposed to develop a strategy, as well as work hard during the interim. So the minority leader is a much different leader, I think, even the majority leader, because you have to do so many things. If you're in the majority, you have the minority leader, but you also have the speaker, so to speak. It's two leaders that can carry you. But when you're in the minority, basically it's your minority leader that has to do the partisan stuff, as well as the public policy lead or point position stuff. And so it's all those roles.
Now, as you're carrying out those roles, it seems to me that over time, we've picked up on the fact that there's a very heavy public reaction to what they see as partisanship in politics.
Right.
And it's real hard to draw some lines as to how far we should go with the partisan side and how far we should go with the statesman side. And that, do you have to deal with that a lot in your job?
If my wife were here, she'd tell you how much that takes years off my life. It really, sometimes I get confused as to where the line is. I mean, you know, and the last session was a good example. It was the last few days when I decided to put partisan politics aside, and just because we had to get out of there, and I think you know some of the details of what we did then. I think we took the lead as a caucus and said, all right, we're going to get out of here. We might still be there. And I think you understand what I'm talking about. I'm referring to a meeting that took place the last day of the session, and when I asked the governor, some others, that they'd come in the room to get, you know, and that kind of thing. It's hard, Kevin, because the members of the caucus will get on you if you're not partisan enough. They think that you're being too good to people they really don't like, because this session, as you know, there are Republican leaders that were not liked by members of and the caucus really didn't like it, so they didn't want me, you know, trying to be a good person and deal with them too much. On the other hand, you got to think about all of Oregon, and you got to think about the process. And so I think every day you have to go back and do a gut check on how partisan you're going to be and how public policy oriented you're going to be.
Do you feel like it's the job of the minority leader, be he or she a Democrat or a Republican? You mentioned earlier to keep the majority on their toes, so to speak, procedurally, but also in terms of how they deal with the minority in the legislative process. Is there also a job to serve as a moderator between the majority and the minority, that is trying to moderate some of those partisan passions that flare up during the session?
There is, if you're my kind of person, because I am not naturally partisan. I am naturally competitive. I'm very much a competitor, although I am a natural Democrat, don't get me wrong. And I'd rather bring people together, I mean, you know what I'm saying, because you're very good at this, on issues and public policy. But I also respect the fact that if you're going to be the leader of the loyal opposition, you are the leader of the loyal opposition. And, you know, they're the ones that are supposed to be responsible. They're the ones that are supposed to have the agenda. Unfortunately, sometimes, most of the times, they don't, I feel, and so you got to come up with it. And but still, they usually have more votes than you, and still you've got the public out there screaming, saying, we don't care whether you're Democrat or Republican, just get the job done. But I think that it's more their responsibility than the minority to lead. But given the kind of elected official I am and my philosophy about politics, public policy, I instinctively want to lead, even if it means putting aside partisan politics at times.
Well, despite being in the minority, as the Democratic caucus will be with 28 votes out of 60 and the Republicans having 32 this past session, and in the session before, 91, and this is the first time in, what, 18 years that the House was controlled by the Republicans. Right. You and I managed to get through a lot of legislation, individually, not as a caucus, but individually. In fact, you and I managed to hold the top 2 positions among all legislators, as far as I know, statistically, for bills that we sponsored that became law in 91 and
Well, I knew you were up there number 1. I didn't know I was number 2.
Well, I was trying to be diplomatic.
I see. Well, he was number 1, folks. But we did all right together. So, I was thinking about the other day about you and I, that we did okay. Yeah, we did.
Well, actually, if you added up the bills that you and I put through in those 2 sessions, figuring out averages, we probably put through as much legislation as 8 other legislators might have.
Oh, I agree with that. That's true.
So somehow you've managed to work with the majority in getting legislation through.
You know, you're right, and this last session didn't surprise me. You got as much done, because you always do. I was stunned that I got as much done. I'll be very frank, because you know, the leader of the opposition, you're the lightning rod. You're the one I'm the one they want to take out. And I don't know. I was really surprised. I think it all comes down to whether or not you're liked sometimes, Kevin. I'll be very frank with you. Now, you may not agree with this, and because even though people can get mad at you, If they really don't dislike you, I think you got a chance to get them to go with you or work with you on something. If they don't like you, you're going to have trouble. So that's why if you're going to be a leader of the opposition, I think you got to be a little careful about how far, it's not so much how partisan you are, it's whether or not all of a sudden someone really decides they don't like you and they're in the majority. Then you're asking for trouble.
Would the analogy be a situation, say, as with lawyers, who often, clients sometimes don't understand that if I go out and advocate for the client and I may argue the case in court, but then afterwards you may go out with the opposing attorney and have a cup of coffee or have a brew even and talk about things and be friendly again, that you're being an advocate for a position, but you're not making it personal. Is that the sort of thing you're talking about, that you can be an advocate for the minority, the loyal opposition, and press the majority? At the same time, you can work with them as individuals, and you don't have to be personal enemies in this process.
I think that's a very good analogy. I think another good analogy is in sports, where you'll find coaches that have been, their teams have opposed each other for years, still have remarkable love and affection and respect for one another, if you know what I mean, even though every season they're going to go head-to-head and try to beat each other. There's another good example, and I think that's the name of the game, how you conduct yourself as a human being, and I think that those are the analogies that tell, yeah, I think that's correct.
So when you're dealing with a bill, first of all, of course, they've got to have some agreement with you on the issue, but then they're willing to be forgiving or at least friendly about it and say, well, I'll work with you on the merits of this, Peter, even though you're that darned Democratic leader that gives us a hard time. This is a good issue, and it's because there's that personal friendship, or at least acquaintanceship, where you have not created an enemies kind of situation, that they'll give you the benefit of that and that you can work together on things?
I think so. I think also, I'll be frank with you, I've lucked out. That 89 session we were last in the majority, I was sat beside and worked with a number of these Republicans who would later on become in the majority and hold key positions, and they remember that. I can tell you that right here. John Mannix and I, on the Family Justice House Judiciary Committee in 1989, sat, he was on that committee, I chaired it. And just the relationship that we had, the way I treated him, and because he felt very strongly about things, that carried over into this session, to be very frank with you, even though we don't agree on many things, and we've had some ferocious battles. But there's an example.
What goes around comes around?
Yeah, paybacks are hell.
But fortunately, what you started going around in '89 was positive. I'll mention to our audience again that you're with us on Capital Insight. I'm State Representative Kevin Mannix from Salem. I'm your host. You may not be able to tell that today with Peter. No, our guest is Peter Courtney, a State Representative from Salem, North Salem, and Kaiser. And if you ever have any questions or concerns, feel free to write to me at Capital Insight, H395, State Capitol, Salem, Oregon 97310. I'm always happy to hear from you. And of course, we're hearing from Peter today. We were talking about what goes around comes around, and now I'd like to focus a little bit on the '93 session. And you've given a talk at my town hall meeting, and you put it in a positive light. In terms of the public perception, we probably did very poorly because the public saw an overlong session, partisan bickering. Right. But you said on reflection, looking at the actual substance of what came out, although it took 2 months too long, there was some pretty good legislation. Do you want to talk about that a little?
Did a great job with the budgets. You were on the committee that did that. Great job on criminal justice, stalking bill, sex offender notification bill. Health care, we got health care. Even land use, updating land use. Those are all huge, huge areas that we worked very, very hard in. And did remarkably well in. We messed the session up totally on the process. We were there way too long, said horrible things about each other, trashed each other. But the work product was really pretty darn going good, Kevin. Also put the sales tax on the ballot. It's coming up. People may not like it, but at least we got an alternative out there. Many people thought we couldn't get it done. So huge things were done by the session.
Well, Peter, by the time people see this show, it actually will have been voted on.
That's true.
So we'll see what happens with it. But then we have the interim now. And what are you working on during the interim? What do you see churning? Because the interim is this time between the last session. We were there for 6 months, this time 7 months. Then we're in this interim period until the legislature comes back together, and that's going to be in January of '95.
Right.
What do you see as happening in the interim?
Well, I'm worried about that because I don't see a lot of activity right now. And if we don't have a lot of activity, the session of '95 is going to be worse than the '93 because, as you know, Kevin, the harder you work during the interim, I think the better your chances are of doing good things in a general session. We got all kinds of criminal, you mentioned, we were talking before the show, juvenile delinquency areas, juvenile court system, the whole gang area. We need to do an awful lot of work on that to prepare for the '95 session. I think we got some serious environmental issues because of the growth, to be very frank with you. I don't think we got health care right yet. We did a nice job on it, but there's still some loose ends there. You got that big education reform bill that came out of the '91 session, Kevin. We haven't done a lot to implement that yet. You know, go back and look at that whole thing. You got the whole retirement system issue that we didn't really take care of. Remember the tax issue in terms of the, you know, whether or not we didn't deal with that one. I can go on and on and on, but we also better start dealing with the budgets early on, because if this vote comes out the way I think it's going to come out, all of us had better start looking at the budgets very early to see how we're going to deal with that crisis.
Well, during the interim, you'll also have a political challenge. That is, we're coming up to an election year. Half of the Oregon Senate, 15 of the 30 positions are up for election, and all of the House of Representatives, since we serve 2-year terms, are up. I'll mention, of course, that I have filed for re-election, and you have filed for re-election. But then Mike Kopetsky has decided not to run for Congress. And some folks speculated about you and I as to whether or not we were going to be running for that position. I've already answered that question whenever anyone asks, which is no, I'm not. I'm running for the Oregon House of Representatives. I'm going to put you on the spot. Have you thought any further about that, or what are you thinking about in terms of Kopetsky's seat in Congress?
Well, I'm not going to run for the seat. I am going to run again for my House seat, and that's just it. I mean, it's just not an option that's available to me now. And I did run for it once 10 years ago, as you told the audience at the beginning of the show, and I would have liked to finish my career having served in Congress after serving in the Salem City Council and the State House Representative here, but the children are just too young. It's just not an option.
So we'll just have to wait a few years maybe to see whether or not you'll do something about something like that.
Yes, sure. I'm getting older, Kevin.
You're not that old. You're what, 47?
Kevin, no, I'm not 47, Kevin, and I just ran the stairs at Western Oregon State College 100 times. I want you to know the stadium stairs, but I'm not 47. I'm older than 47, so anyway.
All right. Sounds like a sensitive topic, so I won't push it.
Yeah, I am sensitive, Kevin. Thanks for doing this to me on your show. In fact, I'm all tensed up now.
Well, we only have a couple of minutes left.
No, we don't
anyway,
even have a couple. This show's over, Kevin, right here and now. I want you to know I'm out of here. No.
Well, getting off your age, let's talk a little bit about this interim, if we're going to talk about elections for the House. Do you have any ideas about how things look in terms of the electoral contest for the House? And you're the Democratic leader.
Well, I'll tell you. I can't read it right now, Kevin. The number of Republicans that aren't going to return, the number of Democrats is the key, I think. Right now, there's more of us saying we're not coming back versus them, but it's early in terms of the filing deadline. But we have been able to come up with some remarkably good candidates in many districts. However, in some districts, we can't get anybody. And, you know, the days when we ran, I think, and maybe this is a stretch, I don't think so, at least it was the early 80s, a lot of self-starters. You don't get self-starters anymore. You have to go beg people to run. I mean, beg them to run. And so it's hard out there, and I think it's just too early, too close to call right now.
Is campaign finance one of the issues that concerns these potential candidates, or is it just the fact that the public perception of the legislature has gone down and because of the partisan bickering perception and all that?
I don't hear much about the cost of campaigning or campaign finance. I hear the fact that why do I want to go serve there? The image of this place is so bad right now. We had such a bad session. Many of them would rather spend their time in local government, to tell you the truth. Many of them they'd rather do that. They're very discouraged. They look at the legislative session right now. And the institution's been hurt badly, Kevin. We really messed this session. We hurt this institution, and people are reacting to that.
Last question, as we're running out of time here. Do you think that we'll do anything to or propose to the public that they modify term limits, which will prevent people right now from serving more than 3 terms in the House?
I think you will see that as we get closer, not this session, but next session, where a lot of us come right up against it. Especially in the House, we only got 3 quick terms. And Kevin, you know, a lot of people in the House, that's just too short. I mean, if they'd given us like 5 terms or 6 terms, 10 years, 12 years, but 3 terms is you're just gone in a day. And I do think it takes some time to know what you're doing. But so I think you'll see some of that.
Well, you and I have come to understand that you don't get everything done in that first, second, or third session. It takes a lot of work. And with that, I'd like to thank you for joining us to discuss your work, and thank our audience for joining us on Capital Insight. We hope to see you again next time. I don't know who the guest will be yet, but I'm sure it'll be someone who will be scintillating and interesting. Thanks for joining us.